We are back. We've been talking about doing this sort of video for a while, and we thought, this is a great time to do it.
Yep.
Now, the bite model. I have conveniently left the official bite model document that was written by Dr. Hassan in the description of this video, so you are more than welcome to
go through all the details. But we'll give you the very short version of this. So essentially what the bite model is, it is a mechanism that is used to assess a group to determine how culty a group is.
Yes.
And it's not just used for religious purposes, although it is often used for religious groups, because that kind of more or less kind of goes into the nitty-gritty of whether or not something is considered a cult.
Yep.
It is also very often used in outside circumstances as well, like non-religious circumstances, like think about multi-level marketing companies, think about sports teams, think about pop culture, that sort of stuff. Like anything can be considered a cult in some way, shape, or form. If you are interested, there is a great podcast out there called Sounds Like a Cult. It goes into things about...
And I also, once again, have the official document that was written by Hassan in the description if you want to go and check it out.
So there are a lot of things that are not often considered cults that can display behaviors of cults.
Now, also, to be considered a cult within the bite model, you have to match at least 80% of the facilitating factors that we're going to go through, and we're only going to be focusing on the AEW fans for right now.
Yes.
Because they are the most vocal cult-like audience right now in wrestling. If you enjoy this, think of other places that maybe we can disseminate and go through it.
And again, the reason that we get exposed a lot to the AEW cult is because, number one, we're Americans. I don't know enough about Japanese wrestling to know whether or not some Japanese company is a cult.
Right.
And AEW's fan base is a little more niche.
Right.
They all they talk is wrestling, but we'll get more into why they display that behavior as we go through the model. So,
all right, with all of that introduction there, because this is a very comprehensive breakdown, let's go into the B, which is behavioral control.
Now, this one I think is, outside of like activities that outside of like the cult is AEW. It's like the church of AEW.
By the way, this is a great example of that.
Right. So it's, what am I trying to say? A lot of it is not like restricting like appearances, because the cult just looks the same because, it's the fandom. There are a lot of things outside of it, like, modification of behavior, I think, is the biggest thing that I want to talk about, because a cult does change behavior, by limiting kind of what you say and what you do and how you say things. So
of all the components of the bite model, to me, this one is the weakest that would claim that they are a cult, because they don't necessarily tell you where to live, how to live. They don't exploit you financially, because it's not like, oh, you're supporting AEW, but you're still getting a product.
Right.
That's very different than, donating money because you feel like you have
to. And again, this is the weakest of the four, because there's not a mechanism. AEW itself is not controlling the mechanisms by which how these people live.
Right. It's generally the fan base. That's why we're not focused on AEW. You have to separate those.
Right.
AEW versus the AEW fan base. Those are two very different quadrants right now.
They are. And AEW is not controlling the cult of the fan base. The cult of the fan base is almost controlling itself, using AEW as kind of a conduit.
Right.
And I think about this along the same lines too of those those like super strong cults, like the Best Buy people, not Best Buy, Bed Bath and Beyond stockholders, or the
Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin. The
what
organization,
about those token coins, the Doge coins, that kind of shit.
The organization itself is not controlling people. It is the cult kind of controlling itself, and their common denominator is that they are attached to this organization.
But there has to be a token of responsibility that these companies have. AEW has cultivated, I would say, maybe not deliberately, but they have fostered and promoted this sort of behavior that sort of created this dynamic.
Yes.
So that's sort of why we're exposing this. Like I said, with behavioral, I think this one is the weakest. So there's not a lot here that I would say.
I would like to say that a lot of this is just self-regulated by the cult itself.
Now,
it is
dependence and obedience would, I would say, be the biggest one. It's like you like AEW or you're an enemy.
Right.
But that's actually part of a different quadrant, which we'll get into. So that's sort of the B part.
Yeah.
Now let's go into this is, I would say, is the strongest. And I don't know why I just chose this picture. I'll just put this one up there.
Because we all know Mr. Brian Meltzer is very pro AEW.
Did you say Brian Meltzer? I think
Dave Meltzer. I got Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer mixed up.
They just had a love child. Would I watch that accidentally for 20 minutes? Maybe.
Yes. So, anyways, and again, a lot of this too is self-regulated, but there is quite a bit of it that is very much done by the cult itself.
Yes,
and a lot of it too just has to do with the secrecy of the business, so to say. Well, like ex-members, ex-AEW employees, they usually don't speak out against the organization that they're a part of.
And if they do, then then the entire then the fan base just attacks them mercilessly till they have to be silent because they can't take it. And that, once again, that is deliberately withholding and distorting information, saying you're lying Frankie Kazarian, you're lying Jimmy Jacobs, you're lying this, but it's like they were inside of the company.
Right. And, again, that also feeds into the information between insider and outsider sources.
Generating and using propaganda extensively. The cult of AEW does that a lot.
And AEW actually does produce a lot of content that they push out constantly.
Well, I mean, that's promotion. That's not
promotion.
That's not.
But that is that can be propaganda or propagandized by the cult.
Well, yeah, but that's, once again, the cult responsibility to an extent of taking that and doing that.
Yep.
With spying on content. We'll talk about that one a little bit later because I think doxing is part of that.
Discouraging access to non-cult sources of information is also a big one as well.
Yep.
They want you to go to certain news sources. They don't want you to talk to. They're not
the credible news source. You have to go to Meltzer. You have to go to SAP because they're the ones who meet right him. And with JD from New York, our opinions are our opinions with that guy, but he used to be one of the meat writers, and now he's not, and now he's being discredited as a news source.
Right.
It's like, do you not realize that if I'm not mistaken, his Mercedes Moné is his cousin? It's something like that.
Something, yeah.
That's what the relationship is. I can't remember what it was.
But and now it's like the entire fan base is going against.
No, you know what it was? He went against Mercedes and the owner of Hog, which JD is a commentator at.
Oh.
That's her cousin. So he actually had to take down what he said, which fits into this information control.
Yeah.
Because he had an opinion that was against Mercedes.
Right.
He had to take it down because he was being essentially harassed and was forced to take it down. What about Ricky Starks going to other places? What about the Costco guys who can't even promote Tops because they had the wrong championship belt? It's like, that's who they have.
Yeah.
That Tops is working with WWE. That's information control.
Right. You want to.
That's textbook information control.
Yeah. And that, I think, is the strongest, at least coming from AEW side, because they're the ones that produce the information.
And they're the ones who are telling people to take it down. Don't wrestle there because you're talking bad about us.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there's consequences, but that's a pattern of behavior.
Right. And there are some that, like, I'm looking at gaslighting to make you doubt your own memory. Mm-hmm. We just talked about how Grand Slam turned from a pay-per-view into a TV special, and now the audience is like, it was never meant to be a pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm. That's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's gaslighting. Information control.
Mm-hmm.
It was never supposed to be this. Yes, it was.
It was promoted as such at first.
Exactly. Now let's go into the T, which is, now this one I actually believe.
This one I think is a little bit stronger. I mean, both the information and the thought control are really strong. And thought control is really strong because this is the kind of culture that AEW has created out of the need at first for an independent wrestling organization, which then just turned into a self-perpetuating thought control experiment.
Right. With rejecting rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. Now, that's a big one because they hate the numbers.
Yep.
Because the numbers do not support that AEW is growing.
Right.
It's us against them. That's thought control.
Yeah.
Now, changing your identity, maybe there might be some outliers. But
there are some people whose entire identity is around
AEW.
Mm-hmm. Changing your name. Go to Twitter. Those exist. There are people that defend. There is a thing called AEW Defenders.
Yeah,
that is literally a thing.
Well, that's not changing their name necessarily.
No, but it's their identity on that platform.
Well, that's different.
Yeah.
With thought control, that's sort of where that is.
To teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts.
Blind support Tony Khan.
Yep.
Don't discriminate against anything because they were critical with Chris Jericho, and I saw even the most diehard AEW people get attacked where they took down all of what they said and said, we're just going to ignore it. That is thought control.
Yeah.
That is 1,000,000% thought control.
Right.
And once again, I think I have an example. Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Ricky going against these wrestlers all of a sudden because they're no longer with AEW. Cody Rhodes was never all that good. He was a mid-carder. Now he's your main eventer.
Right.
Ricky Starks is bad. Mark Henry is discredited. It's like they were fine up until they left AEW and told you how the company is and what the problems are. Exactly. And it's like, they're wrong. Thought control. Thought control. That's thought control. Why do you think we're doing this?
Yeah.
Because I don't see TNA fans doing this. I don't see WWE fans doing this. I don't see it.
Yeah. It is only coming from one.
Right.
And finally, we got to go through the emotional control, too, because this one, I think, is all very, very strong as well.
This one is pretty strong. Mm-hmm. Where you are, us is a perfect example. We have been threatened. Uh-huh. We have been doxxed. We've been harassed. I know I've gotten death threats. That's emotional control.
Yeah.
Stop talking about us or else we're going to do something bad.
Yeah.
If it was like one or two outliers, that would be different.
And it only comes from one fan base.
Anytime that I make a video about AEW, people attack me. And
I feel like it happens to a lot of people. We follow a lot of other creators who might be critical of AEW, and then they get attacked.
Exactly. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Now they don't. I'm sure that there are some outliers that will separate themselves from people like friends and family, but that's their own thing.
Right. Mostly that would be friends. It's like, I can't be friends with you anymore because you don't like AEW.
Right. But that's one outlier because when you're talking about the bite model, you're talking about the culture or the organization or whatever telling you have to.
Right.
And I don't think they tell them they have to.
Right.
It's generally almost like an unwritten rule in a way, but it's never told,
Mm-hmm.
Shun if you disobey and disbelieve. That's a big one.
Yeah. Again, we go back to JD from New York.
Yep. That's just the most prominent example of that. People leaving the company, they are shunned.
Yes.
They're bad now all of a sudden. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
That's really it as it relates.
So AEW, the AEW fan base. So we're gonna separate the AEW fan base from AEW's company because AEW is just a company.
Right.
Like they don't care. All they do is they provide information in the form of entertainment.
They give you content,
yeah,
which is wrestling. They produce a wrestling show. They have merchandise. They hire wrestlers. That's what they do. Now, don't say because it's a company, it can't be a cult. We said that about Nexium.
Right.
And that happened to be a thing. Same thing with Ocean Rikyo.
Right. So AEW is not a cult. It is a business.
Yes.
The leader of that can display cult-like personality, like
behavior.
Yeah, some behavior. But the organization itself is not that. The fan base
is, I'm going to say, based on the bite model, what we have presented to you all as the evidence allotted,
the AEW fan base is very much a cult.
It is a cult. It displays the actions, it has the mentality, and it really does this to anybody with that. And when AEW dies, and there will probably be a chance it will, this will come out.
Yes.
I can almost guarantee you that it will come out that it was very cult in its mentality.
Yeah.
There will probably be private Discord servers regarding these people that were communicating with each other.
Yeah.
Because it always happens after the company dies.
It does.
It always does.
It always comes out. So if you find yourself locked in this battle, in this cult, get some help.
Yep. If you have any of these mentalities, look at yourself in the mirror and say, is this acceptable behavior?
Right.
Would I, as looking to a different person, would I say this is behavior up and comings of a cult?
Yeah.
How do I describe this? If you're an alcoholic, you look at a worser alcoholic and say, that is the direction you're going. You need to stop this now.
Right.
If you see that and say, that's really bad, then you are part of that problem.
Right.
Now, if you did enjoy this topic, we would like to do others. Now, I don't know if it will come out to this, but any sort of wrestling fandom, company, situation, anything like that, let us know. We'll go through the bite model.
Yep. We'll be back to our normal schedule next week. But what are we discussing next week?
We are, there is a pay-per-view, if I'm not mistaken, next week.
Okay. Then we'll just go with that.
I cannot remember. But if you enjoyed this, remember to like, subscribe, share, follow. Enjoy yourself at the Super Bowl. And as always, be
majestic.